Hello and welcome back to the world of Fallout, everybody. Welcome back to the Wasteland, where today we're going to be taking a look at the Gauss Rifle and how this has changed over the years in Fallout, as well as kind of what it's based on, although there isn't really a whole lot of Gauss guns that are currently in the world. Gauss technology is still very much in its infancy in our world right now. That's not to say it couldn't become an actual thing in the future, though, because there has been actually quite a few advances in like a Gauss gun. And it's pretty interesting because essentially you don't really use bullets in this. I guess you kind of do, but bullets are more like just a projectile. So any sort of hard metal would work just fine. Or I guess any sort of hard material would work just fine as a bullet for a Gauss gun. And it's kind of a cool sci-fi gun that does actually kind of exist in real life right now. Not to the point that it is in Fallout's world, where it can just blow off limbs with like a single shot or something, but in the world of Fallout you absolutely do have these. So the Gauss gun is more of an experimental gun that showed up in the Fallout universe, and this wasn't actually in the very first Fallout game. There was no Gauss guns whatsoever. However, this did show up in Fallout 2, which this was arguably one of the strongest weapons in Fallout 2. The Gauss Rifle was really strong, as well as the Gauss Rifle has actually changed its model 3 separate times throughout the Fallout series. The first version of the Gauss Rifle was a semi-automatic rifle that held 20 rounds and did extremely high damage. In Fallout 2, this one did 32 to 43 damage, which was the highest damage out of any of the rifles in the game. There wasn't really anything else that could kind of compete with this, at least rifle-wise. About the closest you could come would be something like the FAL being put into burst fire. That could potentially do more damage than the Gauss Rifle, but even so, the Gauss Rifle could still do aim shots, which were very devastating in these games. The Gauss Rifle was generally a late-game weapon, and it could actually be encountered throughout Fallout 2 as well. It wasn't super uncommon for like Enclave soldiers, especially high-level ones, to have Gauss Rifles, which was quite scary if they had these. Even if you're wearing power armor, the Gauss Rifle can still do a lot of damage. 32 to 43 damage is definitely on the very high end of guns in this game. The Gauss Rifle also used the 2mm EC rounds, which would be coming back into some of the other Fallout games, but it wasn't always the same ammunition that the Gauss Rifle would use throughout these games. This one was semi-auto only, or it was aim shots. You couldn't actually set this to burst fire or anything. This had the maxed out amount of range for any of the rifles at 50, and it also took 5 action points to use, so about on par with most of the other rifles. This one required 6 strength, so it didn't require a ton of strength. This one was very expensive though, and it did have its own unique effect that a couple other guns actually had in Fallout 2, and some of these were in Fallout 1 as well, where this weapon just got bonus accuracy for some reason. You just got like 20% more accuracy than you would with this gun over, say, a different gun like the FAL. I don't think that one actually had it. You could actually rush these if you would like in Fallout 2, where you could run right down to San Francisco. This was a pretty strong strat to get some late game weapons and some late game armor very early on. It was actually a really, really good strat. You go down there, you talk to the Brotherhood, they want you to go get the plans from the Enclave, you can run right over there and get them. You can usually get around like 8 levels, and you also get a bunch of money to where you could go over and buy like a Gauss Rifle, assuming that the shop was actually selling them. So it could be incredibly powerful, and it was a very, very strong weapon throughout Fallout 2. So very good start to the Gauss Rifle. The next time the Gauss Rifle would show up would be in Fallout Tactics, where it would also be showing up with some of its other Gauss weapons. There was actually multiple Gauss weapons in Fallout's history. We'll be talking about that in a separate video. Right now I just kind of want to go over the rifle. And this time it would be actually even stronger than it was in Fallout 2, because this one was still the same model as the one in Fallout 2. It didn't change that. It still held 20 rounds, it was still semi-automatic, it still used the 2mm EC round, it still actually had the same amount of strength requirements, action points, everything. It still had the longest range in the game, or at least was tied with the sniper rifle. That was the only thing that actually had 50 range outside of the Gauss Rifle, and now its damage would be 60 to 80 damage per shot. So it nearly doubled in both minimum damage and maximum damage in Fallout Tactics, which this would actually become very handy. This was definitely another very late game weapon. There were a few enemies that could have Gauss rifles, but they weren't super common. Generally, this was towards the very end of Tactics when you were fighting the robots, and the robots had like extra armor as well as a ton of HP, so taking something like a Gauss rifle was actually very, very useful for those type of enemies. And it would kind of become like a standard weapon for most people playing Fallout Tactics, at least if you were investing in small guns. I should have also mentioned that the Gauss rifle also counted as a small gun in Fallouts 2 and in Tactics, which this would also change throughout the Fallout games as well. So that's kind of interesting. This was a ballistic weapon, which I guess it would be more of a ballistic weapon than like an energy weapon, although I could see it being argued as either. The Gauss Rifle was undeniably extremely powerful in tactics. It was pretty much the gun that you wanted to have on basically everybody on your team, assuming that they weren't already spec'd into something else. But generally speaking, in tactics, most of the time maxing out small guns, or at least getting small guns fairly high, was a pretty solid strategy, since small guns pretty much dominated the first half of the game, if not the first 2/3 of the game. And then by the time that they're kind of weakening out towards the last third of the game, you get like the Gauss Rifle and suddenly they're still top dog then. The next time we'd see the Gauss Rifle pop up would be in Fallout 3. And this actually didn't appear in the base game of Fallout 3, but it appeared in a DLC. This was the very first DLC for Fallout 3. This was Operation Anchorage. And this was kind of a sort of hidden weapon in Anchorage a little bit. You could get one in the very first part of Anchorage, but then that was taken away as you go to the second part of Anchorage. You could still get it back if you managed to pass a speech check with the Quartermaster, and it was the only weapon in that DLC that used the microfusion cells, so any of them that you found there went to the Gauss Rifle. The Gauss Rifle was now classified as an energy weapon, not a small gun anymore, as well as it was no longer a 20-round semi-automatic rifle that did insane damage. It still did insane damage, but now it was a single-shot gun. This one only consumed one microfusion cell. This one did 100 damage per shot. Very low DPS because you did have to reload it after every single shot. Had a massive 5x crit modifier with 50 crit damage, which was pretty good. And it had very high accuracy. However, the accuracy is a little bit weird in Fallout 3 because there is muzzle climb in Fallout 3, or I guess bullet climb in Fallout 3. Muzzle climb wouldn't be weird. But in Fallout 3, if you were shooting something at a very long range, there was a good chance you wanted to aim a little bit lower because the bullet tends to curve upward at a distance, and I'm not entirely certain why that is in Fallout 3. But it is a thing, and this was one of the few scoped weapons in the game, so you could actually ADS with it. It also had a very high chance of knockdown on crit, which made for some interesting interactions with the Gauss Rifle. The Gauss Rifle was incredibly powerful here. Once you completed Operation Anchorage, you could pick one up inside of the armory that was down there, and that was the one and only Gauss Rifle, sort of, that you could get into Fallout 3, and if it ever got beat up, if it ever got broken, you would have to go to somebody else to fix it, because you couldn't fix it up yourself. There was no other Gauss Rifles, and there was no other equivalent weapon that you could fix it up with, which put it in an awkward spot. You did later get another DLC with Mothership Zeta in Fallout 3, which would allow you to get the alien epoxy, and then you could fix up whatever weapon you were holding without needing any sort of repair or any other weapon, which made it so the Gauss Rifle did essentially have infinite health then. And there was also the simulation Gauss Rifle that you could actually get out of the simulation. I have a whole video talking about all the exploits that you can do in Operation Anchorage, and that's not even all of them, as people have told me there's a whole lot more that I missed in that. But essentially in that one, you could take out any weapon that was inside of the DLC, and then you could bring it to the Wasteland. And these weapons would not necessarily have infinite item HP, but they would have pretty close to infinite item HP. They would have like 999,000 HP as opposed to the usual like 500 that they might have. The Gauss Rifle would then appear into Fallout New Vegas, and it would no longer be a single weapon like it was in Fallout 3, where it was extremely rare and tied to a DLC. The Gauss Rifle was now actually somewhat available in Fallout New Vegas. It wasn't a very common weapon at all. The only people that would really be having Gauss Rifles were pretty much the Brotherhood. They were about the only ones to actually use it. This was still counted as an energy weapon in Fallout New Vegas as well, and it was tweaked slightly. This still used the microfusion cells that it did in Fallout 3, but now it consumed more of them per shot, where in Fallout 3, this only consumed 1 per shot, making it one of the most ammo-efficient weapons in the game. This one now consumed 5, which was still quite ammo-efficient. That was still okay. The Gauss Rifle was incredibly powerful. This rivaled a lot of the other weapons that were the strongest weapons in New Vegas as well, because this could kind of hold its own against something like the 50 cal. This was basically the energy weapon equivalent of that, where that one does have faster follow-up shots, and it does more damage on crit, but the Gauss Rifle can do more damage per shot, at least with a lower luck build. It was still very powerful, and there were a couple of ways that you could get these. It was also very scary if you ever made the Brotherhood angry and they sent hit squads and these guys had them. They could mess you up pretty bad with the Gauss Rifles. Elijah also has one of these at the very end of the Dead Money DLC. I think he's the only notable person that is carrying around a Gauss Rifle. There was also one unique variant in Fallout New Vegas as well, called the YCS-186. This one is an interesting gun because you can actually kind of miss this if you take the Wild Wasteland perk, because this one is tied to a random event, or sort of a random event. It's an event that happens towards the north. If you don't have Wild Wasteland, you can go up north and there will be a band of mercenaries there. One of them will have the YCS-186, so you probably want to take him out from a distance because that can do a lot of damage to you. if you can kill him, then you get this rifle that's even stronger than a regular Gauss Rifle. It looks a little bit more beat up, but aside from that, it's pretty much just a stat buff over the Gauss Rifle. Nothing way crazy, at least compared to the already crazy Gauss Rifle, but it is still very strong. If you do take Wild Wasteland, then those mercenaries will be replaced with the aliens, and the alien blaster will be available to you there, so you can get one or the other. I would say the Y86 is generally stronger than the alien blaster, just because it's better for initiating. It kind of has better perks overall, even though they have basically the same perks. And you also get unlimited ammo with the YCS, as opposed to the alien blaster where you get a limited amount of it. But Wild Wasteland is a super fun trait, so I don't blame you for taking it. And then the Gauss Rifle would appear once again in Fallout 4, as well as it appeared in Fallout 76 as well. I still haven't played 76, so I won't comment on that, but in Fallout 4, the Gauss Rifle would be an extremely powerful weapon. This time it functioned a little bit differently than it did in New Vegas or 3, or in 2 and Tactics, where now this weapon you had to charge up manually and then release the actual shot. So it made it a bit more clunky, as well as the weapon did shake around a little bit when you were using it. It was still quite handy though, and still did a lot of damage. It was now converted back to the 2mm EC round rather than the microfusion cells. One of the weird times that they decided to go back on something like this, but either way, that's kind of cool. The Gauss Rifle was the highest damaging rifle in Fallout 4 as well. This one did 110 damage, had fairly okay DPS, since you could kind of follow up with multiple shots from this. Since this no longer held just one round, it held about 7 rounds or up to 20 rounds, unless I guess you got an endless one, then it could hold even more. And this kind of functioned more like the bows in like Skyrim did than the Gauss Rifle had in the previous games. This was still a very powerful weapon, and I didn't really dislike the look of this Gauss Rifle. I think that my favorite version of the Gauss Rifle, at least in terms of looks, is probably the one from Fallout 3 or Fallout New Vegas, although I can appreciate each of them. They all look very unique in their own way, and you do have a lot of liberty with this weapon, since even in the Fallout world, this was still like a very experimental weapon, so there was probably a whole bunch of different models of Gauss Rifles that people were trying. There was also one unique variant of the Gauss Rifle in Fallout 4 that you could always get, which was the Last Minute. The Last Minute was pretty much just an upgraded Gauss Rifle having more damage than a regular one, just because of the upgrades it had, and it did have the effect of doing 50% more limb damage, which is pretty decent. It's not the best that you could get for this. The absolute best that you could get for a Gauss Rifle would be Instigating, since that's just more damage to a full health target. That one's pretty crazy. Mighty would also be very strong on a Gauss Rifle. Other ones that typically are quite strong wouldn't really be that crazy on a Gauss Rifle, like Bleed, where it's similar to a hunting rifle. It has kind of the same situation where it's good, it's still a bonus overall, but you can't really do fast enough follow-up shots to really make good use of that, and just going for something that just gets you more damage, like Mighty, would generally be better in that case. So if you did get really lucky and you managed to get an Instigating Gauss Rifle, you pretty much just one-shot anything in the game at that point. So that'll do it for the history of the Gauss Rifle. The Gauss Rifle has always been a very powerful weapon in the Fallout games. In Fallout 2, it was arguably the best small gun in the game and the best rifle in the game. In Fallout Tactics, it got even better than that. In Fallout 3, it was incredibly powerful, although a bit rare. New Vegas, it was pretty much on par with something like the 50 cal, which a lot of people would argue is the strongest weapon in New Vegas. And in Fallout 4, it was pretty much the strongest weapon once again, at least shot for shot. It did the most amount of damage. You could argue that some other weapons could definitely beat out the Gauss Rifle, at least in terms of like practicality, and I would kind of argue it for Fallout 4, although if you get an Instigating one shot does everything. So tell me your thoughts on the Gauss Rifle, as well as we will be doing a follow-up to this video in the future talking about all the Gauss weapons, because the Gauss Rifle is the most popular of the Gauss weapons, but it's not the only Gauss weapon that's shown up in the Fallout universe. And I kind of want to talk about the other ones too, and why we don't really have them in the later games for some reason. Either way, thank you guys so very much for watching this. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.